My father was the country's youngest ace pilot. 20 years ago, when my mother collapsed from a heart attack and needed an emergency transfer, he answered the phone after 37 missed calls and said only this: "The weather is bad today. The aircraft can't take off." So my mother died on a stretcher outside a county emergency room, while waiting for help that never came. The next day, someone posted a photo online. A white Cessna crossed a cloudless sky, scattering pink flower petals over a birthday party for another woman's daughter. My father never came to the hospital. He didn't come to the funeral either. For 20 years, my uncle drove a cab at night to put me through flight school. Now I was 29, the youngest chief examiner in the Federal Aviation Administration, and on my desk sat an application for captain upgrade from a 22-year-old prodigy named Yasmin Sullivan. Her, Darren Tor, was the CEO of ZAC Airways. My father. I flipped through the file until I reached the family information page. Emergency contact, Zachary Lowe. I looked at Yasmin's photo for a long time before closing the file. "Sorry," I said. "I want to prove her evaluation." Jason Zimmerman's smile froze. He looked from me to the file I had pushed back. "Mr. Lowe, what do you mean you want to prove it?" "I mean exactly that." He adjusted his tie and forced a laugh. "Why not review it again? Yasmin Sullivan has over 300 flight hours. She qualifies. She got an A on the simulator assessment. Full marks on all 3 emergency procedure drills last year. You won't find another co-pilot her age with this record. As chief examiner, I have the right to reject any application I find suspicious." Jason kept one hand on the file. "Mr. Lowe, how about this? I booked a table at Best in Club tomorrow night. We can talk the file back." The smile vanished from his face. He picked it up and headed for the door, then paused. "Mr. Lowe, you're only 29. Yeah, it must have been hard getting to this position." His voice was soft, almost a warning. Then he left. The office went quiet. I stared at the faint imprint the file had left on my desk, then turned toward the window. Outside, the sky was a clear, endless blue, the same kind of sky my Uncle Peter had described from 20 years ago. He stood outside the county hospital calling my father again and again, 37 times with no answer. The 38th call finally went through. In the background, there had been children laughing, pellers winding down, and my father had said the weather was bad. That afternoon, my secretary, Annie, knocked and stepped in. "Mr. Lowe, ZAC Airways called. They want to know if you finished reviewing the file." Mr. Zimmerman delivered. "And when it'll be approved?" "Reviewed it. Tell them the rejection notice will be posted in the system tomorrow." She hesitated. "Mr. Lowe, the person in charge of ZAC Airways is Zachary Lowe." "I know." She met my eyes, then quietly left. That night, I called Uncle Peter. He was driving his cab, and I could hear windshield wipers brushing back and forth. "Uncle Peter, did you eat?" "Yeah. Why are you asking all of a sudden?" "Just checking." He chuckled and didn't press. Before hanging up, he said, "Day after tomorrow is your mom's death anniversary. Don't forget." "I won't." After the call, I opened the safe in my apartment. Inside was a brown paper envelope sealed with tape, gone yellow from age. I took out 2 documents. The first was a weather assessment report, signed by Zachary Lowe 20 years ago. In the remarks column, "Not suitable for takeoff." The second was the official hourly weather report from the south. On observation center on that same day, visibility more than 6 miles. Cloud ceiling above 2 miles. Wind speed 5 knots. Clear skies. It had taken me 7 years to obtain those 2 pieces of paper. One from the Federal Aviation Authority archives, the other from the National Meteorological Department. They had never been placed side by side until now. At 6 that evening, the disciplinary inspection team received a complaint from the board secretary of ZAC Airways. The accusation: I had abused my authority in Yasmin Sullivan's assessment because of personal grievances. I have been waiting for that call. Next morning, Mike Zeller from disciplinary inspection phoned me. "Ethan, you know ZAC Airways filed a complaint, right?" "Yeah. They said you denied Yasmin's promotion without a valid written reason. The reason will be in the system today." Mike lowered his voice. "There's one more thing. Zachary is coming this afternoon." I said nothing. "Do you want to step out for a while?" "Fine." At 2:20 p.m., a black Maybach rolled up outside the FAA building. From a 3rd-floor window, I watched Zachary Lowe step out. 20 years had changed him, but not enough. Gray at the temples now. Tailor navy coat, straight-backed, precise. He still looked like the kind of man other people moved aside for. Uncle Peter used to say, "Your dad's capable." Tough, too. Just tough in all the wrong places. Zachary didn't come to my office first. Went straight to Director Henry Stone's office. The door stayed closed for 40 minutes. Then Henry's secretary came for me. "Mr. Lowe, room 307. When I entered, Zachary was seated at the long conference table. Jason sat beside him. Next to Jason was a woman in pearls, somewhere in her 40s. Winnie Sullivan. I recognized her immediately from the old photo online, standing beside the Cessna, smiling in sunlight, holding a little girl in a pink dress. That little girl was Yasmin. Zachary said, calm and commanding, as if I worked for him. I took the chair across from him. Mr. Lowe, he said, I reviewed Yasmin's file myself. There are no issues? Why did you reject her captain upgrade? I'm suspicious of her flight hours. Suspicious? He frowned. Every flight was signed off by the crew. The data is complete. He passed the airline's internal assessment. The airline can make its internal judgment. I said, the FAA assessment is mine. Winnie leaned forward before Zachary could answer. Mr. Lowe, Yas has been gifted since childhood. She got her license at 18. At 22, she's already better than many senior pilots. She earned this through her own ability. I wasn't evaluating her talent. I said, I was reviewing her record. Then tell us what's wrong with the record. You'll receive that in writing. I want to hear it now. Zachary lifted one hand and Winnie fell silent. Then he took an envelope from his coat and slid it across the table. This is an offer from Zach Airways. He said, Chief Pilot, $3 million a year, plus stock options. He leaned back. Current position is exhausting. You're young. You shouldn't limit yourself. I pushed the envelope back without opening it. Mr. Zachary Lowe. I'm Ethan Lowe. His fingers paused against the tabletop. I know your name. A faint twitch touched his mouth. And I know who you are. He stood and buttoned his coat. Ethan, if you won't help, I'll find another way. He walked out. As when he passed me, she stopped and said softly, Young man, you should leave yourself a way out. After they left, I opened. The envelope under the offer letter was a banker's acceptance from Zach Airways. $3 million. I placed the envelope in a transparent evidence bag, sealed it, wrote the date and case number on the front, then looked up at the surveillance camera in the corner. Its red light was blinking. On the third day, my name appeared on the FAA's internal website. Chief Examiner Ethan Lowe is suspected of policy violations during a captain upgrade assessment. Effective immediately, he is suspended pending investigation. That same day, 3 airlines pushed the same article to the media. The youngest chief examiner, exposed for abusing authority over personal grudge. Talented female pilot unjustly denied captain upgrade. No mention of Zachary Lowe. No mention of Zach Airways management uploading late data. Just a smiling photo of Yasmin in uniform. And headlines about a gifted young woman being blocked by a bitter man in power. The comments were predictable. I support Yasmin. Women this talented shouldn't be crushed by authority. If personal revenge influenced the decision, he should be punished. That afternoon, Uncle Peter called. Ethan, your aunt showed me something online. Said you bullied a young girl. Don't read that stuff. He wants to know if you offended someone you can't afford to offend. I did, I said. And he deserved it. He was quiet a moment. As long as you know what you're doing. He never asked more than that. For 20 years, he had carried everything without complaint. My mother from the emergency room, to the morgue, then to the cemetery, then me through the rest of my life. On the day of her burial, he had squatted by her grave, smoked half a pack, and said, Lily, don't worry. I'll raise Ethan. The day after my suspension, Yasmin came to find me herself. She waited outside the FAA building without an appointment. Up close, she looked younger than in the file. Determined, nervous, proud. Mr. Lowe, she said, I didn't know anything about what my dad did. I only know my skills are real. I flew every one of those hours myself. I looked at her. Does he know you came here? No. There's no QAR data corresponding to 120 of her flight hours. She blinked. What? Those hours appear in your file and in the airline system. But the QAR folder has no matching records for them. The data was uploaded later. All at once. That's impossible. I flew every. I'm not asking whether you touched the controls. I cut in. I'm asking whether your record was tampered with. Her fist tightened. For a second, she looked like she wanted to argue. Then her face changed. If you're right, she said slowly, then those 120 hours. She couldn't finish the sentence. She turned and walked away. Back in my office, a notice was waiting on my desk. Public special review meeting would be held in 3 days to investigate my handling of Yasmin Sullivan's. Captain upgrade representatives from all airlines were invited. Good. I opened the bottom drawer and took out the brown envelope into my briefcase. It went along with a small Bluetooth speaker and a USB drive. 3 years earlier, a retired pilot had handed me an old tape with trembling hands. Then he said, I've held this for 17 years. If I die with it, I won't have peace. The review meeting was held on the 9th floor. Mike sat in the middle of the inspection panel. Airline representatives packed the room. Zach Airways had sent 7 people. Jason was in the front row beside their general counsel and PR manager. When he sat near the back, Zachary sat in the center in a dark gray suit, with the airline's gold wing badge pinned to his chest. When I entered, his gaze swept over me. Once, cold and controlled, Mike read the issue under review. This meeting will examine whether Chief Examiner Ethan Lowe improperly exercised veto authority and abused his position during the captain upgrade assessment of ZAC Airways Co. Pilot Yasmin Sullivan. Mr. Lowe, state your reason for rejection. I opened the file. There is no QAR data corresponding to 120 flight hours in Yasmin Sullivan's record. Server logs show that the data for those hours was uploaded in one batch, 48 hours before the application. The IP address traces to Zach Airways management. I handed printed screenshots to the panel. Mike looked down at them, eyebrows lifting. The room fell silent. Then Zach Airways general counsel stood. Mr. Lowe, delayed QAR transfers are not unusual. System migration or server maintenance can cause bulk synchronization. You cannot prove the data was fabricated. I didn't say it was fabricated. I replied. I said the record was suspicious, and I declined to sign off. That is within my authority. Then Zachary stood. He walked into the center aisle and faced the panel. Today, I'm not speaking as chairman of Zach Airways, but as a pilot with over 30 years of experience. I watched Yasmin grow up. Flying has been her dream since childhood. Her talent, discipline, and skill can withstand scrutiny. He turned and looked at me, but someone stood in her way. Person is Ethan Lowe, my son. Whispers exploded across the room. Zachary continued in a grave, measured tone. Separated from his mother 20 years ago. I failed in my duty as a father. That is my fault. But in this assessment, Ethan denied Yasmin's upgrade, not because of any issue in her record, but because he holds resentment over his mother. He abused his authority over a personal grudge. The room went still again. Mike looked at me. Ethan, do you want to respond? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened my briefcase and removed the brown paper envelope from it. I took two old documents and laid them side by side on the table. This, I said, touching the first, is the weather assessment report, signed and submitted by Zachary Lowe 20 years ago. Remarks not suitable for takeoff. The yellowed paper showed his signature and the date. I touched the second document. This is the official hourly weather report from South, on observation station for that same day. Visibility over 6 miles out. Ceiling above 2 miles. Wind speed 5 knots. Then I looked at him. You said the weather was bad. You said the aircraft could not take off. Next, I unfolded an A3 sheet. Across the table, a curved flight path overlaid on a city map. This is the route flown by Cessna. Registration B10YZ, between 2s and 4 LPM. That same day, my voice stayed level. That aircraft belongs to Zach Airways. For the first time, something cracked in Zachary's face. Mike stared at the papers. Mr. Zachary, this weather report. Zachary said nothing. I took out the speaker, pressed play, and set on the table. The room filled with static. Then a younger man's voice. Easy, careless, unmistakable. The weather is bad today. The aircraft can't take off. Behind the words came children laughing, the whir of propellers spinning down, and the soft, dry whisper of petals falling. The recording kept playing, and Zachary Lowe's hands began to shake. Then, for the back of the room, a chair scraped sharply against the floor. Yasmin stood up, staring at her father as if she'd never seen him before. Dad, she said, what did you do? The question hung in the humid air of the 9th floor conference room, vibrating with a raw, trembling pitch that the soundproofing panels on the walls couldn't absorb. Zachary Lowe did not look at her immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the yellowed weather report on the table, then drifted to the tape recorder, and finally to me. His jaw tightened, a hard, geometric clenching of muscle that I'd seen in newspaper profiles detailing his steely resolve during corporate takeovers. But here, under the flat glare of the fluorescent tubes, that resolve looked like nothing more than the desperate rigidity of a pilot realizing his engines had flamed out at 10,000 feet. Yasmin, Winnie Sullivan whispered, her hand reaching out to grab her daughter's sleeve. Her pearls clicked against each other, a sharp, artificial sound. Sit down. This is a fabrication. It's a cheap trick from a bidder. I asked him a question, Mom, Yasmin said. She didn't raise her voice, but she didn't sit down either. She brushed Winnie's hand away. Her eyes, wide and glassy, were locked on Zachary's profile. The Cessna B10YZ. That was the plane we had at the old hangar. The one you sold when I was 7. You told me you bought it the year I was born. She took 2 steps forward, her flight boots heavy on the thin carpet. My 2nd birthday. You told me the sky was full of pink petals because the angels wanted to celebrate me. You told me that story every year before I blew out my candles. Zachary slowly turned his head to look at her. The paternal warmth he usually projected, the proud father of the aviation prodigy, had vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating mask of a SO managing a crisis. We are in an FAA administrative hearing. Yasmin, he said, his voice flat, devoid of the cadence he used in boardrooms. This is not the place for this. Then where is? Yasmin's voice cracked. She pointed a trembling finger at the flight path map I had laid out. He has the flight records, Dad. The meteorological data. The tower logs. Did you lie to him? Did you let his mother die so you could fly over my party? The room was deathly quiet. Even the Zach Airways general counsel, a man who paid his mortgage by finding loopholes in federal safety guidelines, sat with his hands frozen over his tablet, his eyes darting between the papers on the desk and the floor. Mike Zeller, the head of the disciplinary panel, cleared his throat. The sound was dry, like sandpaper on wood. Mr. Zachary Lowe, he said, his tone no longer deferential. The FAA records show that on October 14th, 20 years ago, you were the pilot in command registered to the Emergency Medical Transport Pool for the Southern District. Is this weather assessment report, signed by you, an accurate representation of the conditions at 1400 hours? Zachary didn't answer. He looked at Henry Stone, the FAA director, who was sitting at the back of the room. Henry had his hands folded over his stomach, his face unreadable. He was an old friend of Zachary's, a man who had shared whiskey in airport lounges from Houston to Seattle. But Henry was also a bureaucrat, and bureaucrats know when a ship is taking on too much water to salvage. He didn't meet Zachary's gaze. He looked down at his watch. The document speaks for itself, I said, my voice steady, sounding far calmer than I felt. And so does the official observation from the Southend station. But more importantly, the flight path of B-10YZ on that afternoon shows a departure from Southend Municipal at 14:15, a holding pattern over the Sullivan Estate in the northern suburbs from 1430 to 1500 hours, and a return to base at 1530. All while the emergency dispatch was calling his tail number for a priority transfer of a cardiac patient from County General to the State Medical Center. I leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the table, feeling the cool laminate against my palms. The distance between County General and the State Medical Center is 40 miles. In a Cessna 172, at cruising speed, that's 20 minutes. My mother survived on that stretcher for 3 hours before her heart gave out. You had the time, Mr. Lowe. You had the aircraft. You had the clear sky. You just had somewhere else to be. This is ancient history. Winnie stood up, her face flushed red beneath her makeup. This has nothing to do with Yasmin's captain upgrade. You are using an old family dispute to destroy a young woman's career. It's malice, pure and simple. It has everything to do with the upgrade, Mrs. Sullivan, I said, turning my eyes to her. A pilot who falsifies weather reports to evade an emergency dispatch is a pilot who lacks the basic moral integrity required for command. And an airline that uploads late, unverified QER data 48 hours before a check ride is an airline that is hiding something. I didn't reject Yasmin's application out of malice. I rejected it because Zach Airways is running a shadow logbook, and as chief examiner, I don't sign off on ghost hours. That's enough, Zachary said. He stood up, smoothing the lapels of his Navy suit. He looked at the panel, then at me. There was no apology in his eyes, only a cold, hard ember of resentment. This hearing is adjourned. We will address these allegations through our legal department. Yasmin, we're leaving. He reached for her arm, but Yasmin stepped back, out of his reach. No, she said. Zachary paused, his hand hanging in the empty space between them. Yasmin, you lied to me, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to carry the weight of her entire 22 years. You told me you earned everything you had. You told me I earned everything I had. But you built a playground out of someone else's grave. And now you're asking me to walk out of here with you? She looked at me, her eyes searching my face for something, anger, triumph, pity. She found none of them. I was just a surveyor looking at a broken instrument panel. I didn't know, she said to me, her voice barely audible. I know, I replied. She turned and walked out of the conference room. The heavy oak door swung shut behind her with a soft, hydraulic hiss. Winnie looked at Zachary, then at the door, her face a mask of panic. Yasmin, wait. She grabbed her designer bag and hurried after her daughter, her heels clicking rapidly down the tiled corridor. Zachary remained standing by the table for a long moment. He didn't look at the panel, nor did he look at his lawyers. He looked at the tape recorder, which was still emitting a low, rhythmic hiss of tape hiss and the distant, ghost-like sound of children laughing from 20 years ago. With a slow, deliberate movement, he reached down, picked up his leather briefcase, and turned toward the door. As he passed my chair, he stopped. He didn't look down at me, but his voice was low enough that only I could hear it. You think you've won something, Ethan, he said. But all you've done is ground a girl who had the potential to be better than both of us. You're just like your mother, narrow-minded, obstinate. You don't understand how the world actually works. My mother died because she believed in the rules, I said, looking straight ahead. She believed that when you call for help, the person who promised to come actually shows up. I'm just enforcing the schedule, Mr. Lowe. He didn't reply. He walked out, his lawyers falling in a step behind him like a flock of dark-suited crows. The room cleared out slowly. The airline representatives left without a word, their faces grim, already calculating the public relations disaster that was about to hit Zach Airways. Mike Zeller stayed behind, helping me gather the documents. You're gonna get a lot of heat for this, Ethan, Mike said, his fingers tracing the edge of the yellowed weather report. The board of directors at Zach Airways has deep pockets. They'll try to paint you as a rogue agent with a personal vendetta. Let them, I said, sliding the documents back into the brown paper envelope. I turned the bribe. The surveillance tape from room 307 is already logged in the federal database. The QER server discrepancies are on the main FAA server. If they want to fight, they'll have to fight the federal government, not me. And your suspension? It'll be lifted by Monday, I said, taking my briefcase. Or it won't. Either way, I'm going home. The drive back to my apartment was quiet. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, orange shadows across the highway. I rolled down the window, letting the cool autumn air fill the cabin of my old sedan. It smelled of dry leaves and damp asphalt. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, watching the headlights of the cars on the street below sweep across my ceiling like searchlights. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Uncle Peter. Got some extra cabbage and brisket. Come over for dinner. I didn't feel like eating, but I knew Peter had been watching the news. The local channels had already picked up the story. FAA chief examiner suspended in nepotism scandal, followed quickly by an update. Zach Airways CEO accused of bribery and record falsification. I put on my jacket and drove down to the old neighborhood. Peter's house was a small, single-story bungalow with a sagging porch and a patch of yellowed lawn that he watered with a rusted green hose every evening. The yellow cab he drove at night was parked in the driveway, its roof light dark, the windshield smeared with the grease of city rain. When I opened the screen door, the smell of boiled cabbage and beef broth hit me, warm and familiar. Peter was sitting at the kitchen table, his reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose, looking at a folded newspaper. "You're late," he said, not looking up. "Traffic on the bridge," I said, taking a seat opposite him. He pushed a bowl of brisket toward me. "Eat. You look like you've been living on stale coffee and administrative forms." I picked up a fork but didn't start eating. "You saw the news?" "Your aunt showed me on her tablet," Peter said, taking off his glasses and folding them carefully. His hands were thick, the knuckles swollen from years of gripping a steering wheel for 12 hours a day. "She was crying. Thought they were going to put you in jail." "They're not going to put me in jail, Uncle Peter." "I know," he said. He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a pack of cigarettes, then remembered he was inside and laid them on the table. "I knew Zachary was a bastard. I knew it the day he walked out on your mother when she was 6 months pregnant with you. But I didn't think he'd do that. To lie about the weather. To let her lay there." He looked out the window, his eyes reflecting the yellow light of the kitchen lamp. "I called him 37 times, Ethan. My fingers were shaking so hard I could barely press the buttons on that old Nokia. The hospital staff kept telling me they needed the helicopter or the Cessna. The roads were blocked by a mudslide down in the pass. He was our only shot." "He was at a birthday party," I said. "Yeah," Peter said. He let out a long, slow breath that sounded like a sigh. "A birthday party. 20 years I've been driving that cab, thinking maybe I didn't explain it right. Maybe I didn't tell him how blue her lips were. Maybe if I just screamed louder into the receiver, he would have understood." He turned back to me, his eyes shiny with unshed tears. But he understood. He just didn't care. He cared about his other family, I said. He cared about his image. "You did good, Ethan," Peter said, his voice thick. "Your mother, she would have been proud of you. Not because you're the youngest chief examiner, but because you didn't let him buy you." He reached across the table and patted my hand. His palm was rough, like sandpaper. "Now eat your dinner. Tomorrow we have to go to the cemetery." The next morning, the rain came. It wasn't the heavy, dramatic storm of summer afternoon, but a cold, gray drizzle that clung to the windshield and made the pavement slick. We drove to the cemetery in Peter's cab. He didn't turn on a meter, but he kept the radio tuned to a jazz station that played low, melancholic trumpet solos. My mother's grave was in the old section of the cemetery, under a large oak tree that had lost most of its leaves. The headstone was simple, Lily Lowe, 1954 to 2006, beloved sister and mother. Peter stood back a few paces, holding a black umbrella over his head, his free hand shoved deep into his coat pocket. I knelt down and cleared away some wet leaves that had stuck to the granite. "I brought you the reports, Mom," I whispered. I didn't have the papers with me. They were locked in an evidence locker at the FAA headquarters, but I felt like she knew. For 20 years, her death had been an unresolved flight plan, a mystery of bad luck and unfortunate timing. Now, the telemetry was clear. The coordinates of her end were plotted, and the person responsible had been identified. But as I sat there on the wet grass, I didn't feel the rush of satisfaction I had spent 7 years anticipating. The void in my chest didn't fill up. It was just a cold, quiet space like the cockpit of an airplane after the engines have been shut down for the night. "Ethan," I turned. A few yards away, standing near a gravel path, was Yasmin. She was wearing a simple black trench coat, her hair damp from the drizzle. She didn't have an umbrella. She stood there, looking at me, her hands tucked in her pockets, looking smaller and younger than she ever had in her FAA file. Peter looked at her, then at me. "I'll wait in the cab," he said softly. He gave her a long, searching look as he passed, but he didn't say anything. Yasmin walked over, her boots squelching slightly in the wet grass. She stopped a few feet from the grave, her eyes falling on the headstone. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. Her voice was steady, but her face was pale, almost translucent in the gray light. "I looked up your mother's name in the old records. I wanted to see her." "Why?" I asked, standing up. "Because I wanted to know who paid for my second birthday," she said. She looked down at the granite. She was 52. "That's not old." "No," I said. "It isn't." She was quiet for a long time, the rain dripping from the ends of her hair onto her collar. "Zach Airways is going into receivership," she said. "The board forced my dad to resign this morning. The FAA is auditing every single flight hour logged by the airline over the last 10 years. They're going to revoke my license." "I know," I said. "Tampering with QER data is a federal offense. Even if you didn't know about it, your hours are invalid. You'll have to start over from private pilot minimums." She let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Start over. I don't even know if I want to fly anymore. Every time I look at a Cessna, all I'm going to see are those pink petals." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said. "You were 2 years old. You didn't choose your father." "But I benefited from him," she said. "The flight schools, the fast-track simulator time, the pristine record. I thought I was a prodigy, Ethan. I really did. I thought I was special, but I was just a brand, a marketing tool for his airline." "You have talent, Yasmin," I said. "I watched your simulator assessment. Your hand on the controls is steady. Your reaction time in the flame-out drill was 3 seconds faster than the industry average." That part wasn't fake. A small, sad smile touched her lips, then vanished. "My dad used to tell me that the sky is the only place where the ground doesn't matter. He said up there, you're free from all the mess down below." She looked up at the gray, overcast sky. "But the ground always catches up with you, doesn't it?" "It does," I said. "Gravity is a constant." She nodded slowly, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, silver pin. It was the Zach Airways Gold Wing badge, the same one Zachary had worn on his chest during the hearing. She laid it gently on the base of my mother's headstone. "I'm sorry," she said. She turned and walked back down the gravel path, her figure fading into the gray mist of the cemetery. I looked at the badge resting on the wet granite. The gold was bright against the gray stone, but the rain was already starting to dull its shine. I didn't pick it up. I left it there, a piece of useless metal on a grave that had been waiting 20 years for a resolution. 6 months later, the FAA disciplinary investigation was officially closed. My suspension had been lifted within a week of the hearing, and I was back at my desk on the 3rd floor. The view from my window hadn't changed. The same endless blue sky, the same white lines of vapor trails stretching toward the horizon. But the name on the door across the hall had changed. Zach Airways was gone, its assets acquired by a national carrier, its blue and gold livery repainted in neutral whites and grays. Zachary Lowe had avoided prison through a plea bargain that involved a massive fine and a lifetime ban from holding any executive position in the aviation industry. He had sold his estate in the suburbs and moved to a small town on the coast, where he reportedly spent his days sitting on a pier, watching the fishing boats come in. I hadn't spoken to him since the day of the hearing. I didn't need to. One Friday afternoon, as I was packing up my briefcase to leave for the weekend, my secretary, Annie, knocked on the door. "Mr. Lowe, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she said you'd know who she is." I looked up. "Show her in." Yasmin walked in. She was wearing a simple flannel shirt and jeans, her hair tied back in a ponytail. She looked different, older perhaps, but there was a quiet, grounded look in her eyes that hadn't been there when she was the prodigy co-pilot in her crisp uniform. "Ethan," she said, stopping by the edge of my desk. "Yasmin," I said. "How have you been?" "I've been working," she said, "in Oregon, a small charter outfit near Bend, flying fire-spotting patrols in an old Super Cub." I smiled slightly. "That's tough flying. Lots of turbulence, low altitudes." "It's real flying," she said, and for the first time, her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes. "No automated flight directors. No shadow logbooks. Just me, the stick in the wind." She reached into her shoulder bag and pulled out a blue logbook, placing it on my desk. It was worn at the edges, the pages slightly curled from cabin humidity. "I have 250 hours," she said, "fully verified by the State Forestry Service. I'd like to apply for my commercial license reinstatement." I looked at the logbook, then up at her. "The chief examiner doesn't usually handle standard reinstatements," I said. "I know," she said, "but I wanted you to be the one to check the data. I wanted to make sure there are no ghost hours left in my file." I opened the logbook. The entries were written in a neat, precise hand. Every flight had a coordinate, a tail number, and the signature of a Forest Service dispatcher. There were no bulk uploads, no late synchronizations, just the steady, day-by-day accumulation of a pilot earning her wings, 1 hour at a time. I took out my stamp, pressed it into the blue ink pad, and brought it down on the first page of her application. The paperwork will take a few days, I said, sliding the logbook back to her. But the data looks good. Thank you, Ethan, she said. She took the logbook, her fingers brushing against mine for a brief second. For everything. She turned and walked toward the door, then paused, looking back at me. My dad called me last week. He wanted me to come visit him. He said he has a new boat. Are you going? I asked. She looked at the logbook in her hand, then at the window, where the afternoon sun was casting a warm, golden glow across the desk. No, she said. The weather is bad down there. I don't think I can make the flight. She left, and the office went quiet again. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was a clear, endless blue, the same kind of sky my mother had looked up at 20 years ago while she waited. But today, there were no Cessna planes scattering petals. There was only a high-altitude jet, its engines silent from this distance, drawing a straight, white line across the blue, heading west into the sun. I picked up my briefcase, turned off the lights, and locked the door behind me. It was time to go home.